45 minutes. So I will ask all of my colleagues and my panelists to be concise as possible. And I will actually try to set the tone for being concise and as articulate as I can be, just to introduce the topic. We're here to talk about privatization. But privatization is not just about selling assets, as we all know. It's about trust. It's about how do we view the country that we are going to be investing in, the assets that we're going to buy, how safe are the property rights in those in that country. And we deal as part of this with the issue of trust. We deal with what I think was described in the morning session about the gap. The gap between the perception and the reality, that oftentimes the perception takes a while to catch up with the reality. And, you know, listening to this morning's session, there was a lot of good things that were said, a lot of positive aspects, but I still think we're talking about the potential of the country. We're talking about the future. We're talking about if, when. Guys, it's already happened. Ukraine has turned the corner. We are already starting to move forward in a way that we have not seen before. In the last 6 months, we have seen a large number of investors looking at upwards of $1 billion deals in Ukraine as part of a competition between Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia. So, judged by that standard, we've actually achieved what we set out to achieve 2 years ago, was to be considered in the region as an attractive investment destination. What we have to do now is to prove that we belong in the Premier League. We've been invited to the Premier League. We can get relegated in a minute, but we need to prove that we have the ability to step up and play. And one of the key areas for the government this year has been the privatization process. The key areas to show that we can actually, that this is a good place to invest, it's an attractive place to invest. And it's not even so much about what assets are being put up for sale. We'll discuss that because there's, you're not privatizing enough, fast enough, etc. But it's about how we go about doing that. We have 3,500 state-owned enterprises, which is arguably 3,200 more than we need. And the other 300 are also subject to some sort of review, whether we need them or not. Some are strategic. So a lot of these have absolutely no value to the state. They're income streams for special interests. Some people have privatized. It's a great word because in Ukrainian privatization is privatizacja, and then there's this word privatizacja, which means you privatize it for yourself. And that's what's happened in a lot of these areas. So we have to have the credibility by trying to make sure that this process has integrity. And one of the key aspects of this was the government passed, through the Verkhovna Rada, the government drafted and the Verkhovna Rada passed a new law on privatization, which significantly streamlines the process. And we're very lucky to have with us today Vitaliy Trubarov, the acting head of the State Property Fund, who is going to talk. We're going to have a discussion about the law and the assets that have been put up for sale. Philippe Vogeleer from Vodafone, small communications company you might have heard of. We have Adomas Audickas, who, this is like your 5th panel, man. You must be exhausted. Also an advisor, we're on the same team, advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And of course, Bozidar Djelic, who we can count on for great insight for the whole region, from Lazard, advisor to the Ukrainian government, and former, now you've been called everything from Prime Minister to President to Deputy Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia. We've got a short period of time. We've got good people. Vitaliy, tell us a bit about the government's new privatization law and what impact has that had on the privatization of state-owned enterprises.
I will be very brief. And first of all, I would like to say that though today we talked about privatization, which means the property grab, not just privatization, but the government is not joking anymore. The government is planning the process of privatization as one of the key phenomena in attracting the foreign investors. I've been working in the field of privatization for the last 15 years, and I would like to state the fact that indeed, when we talk about the large privatizational processes, Krivorush was the only success story. We have managed, together with the Office of Reforms, with our foreign partners and advisors, analyzed the reasons of these not-so-success stories of privatization and why privatization is considered the negative phenomena. And indeed, the process was quite heavily politicized, and another problem was the fact that there were too many regulations, too many legislations in privatization. There were 7 different laws on privatization, lots of normative acts which were regulating the process. And if the company is not within the system, it would not understand those legislations. So when we started developing the transparent process of privatizations, we developed also the new legislation. The legislation which now includes all the modern tendencies of privatization and also our own experience. This legislation has passed all the administrative hurdles, all the stages, and has been passed by the Supreme Rada at the beginning of 2018. The President signed off this law at the beginning of March, and now we have got the whole legal framework so that the legislation will function. Just to give you the overview of that legislation, which could be interesting for the investors. The legislation shows that we are indeed transparent and we are deregulating the majority of the processes. Again, we just wanted to remind you we had 7 laws before on privatization, now we've got 1. Quite often when we talk with the investors, we hear that a lot of time was given to the preparation for privatization. So the new legislation cuts this time in half. You mentioned 3,500 state enterprises are in our state sector, but it's more than that. We had 10 different groups of those state enterprises. Now we've got only 2 groups, the large enterprises and also the small and medium enterprises for privatization. And when we talk about small privatization, their assets are not higher than 200 million hryvnias. They are sold by not more than that, and they are sold on an electronic platform. When we talk about the larger enterprises, we will involve, of course, and attract our foreign advisors, and all the advisors are selected through the open competition. That's a big bonus. So the state hires an advisor to sell the asset, and the investor also hires an advisor to buy the asset. So there'll be indeed the same language they'll be using, they'll be talking on, so that they could create the appropriate financial model for the state to indeed sell the asset appropriately. Maybe a quick deviation from the fact in every country there is a need during the privatization to get the maximum profit for the budget. However, that's not the key point. The key point is that we try to remove the whole idea of financial revenues for the state in privatization. What is much more important is the enterprise that will work, that will indeed bring profit. So it's very important for us, for Ukraine at the moment, to see that those enterprises will grow. and will increase a number of workforce. They will pay the taxes, and then the government, of course, will use those taxes for the social support system. So that is much more important than just the primary revenue during the sales. This legislation also gives the state the guarantees so that if somebody tries to play on the market prices, when they try to work on various deposits, we have the state guarantees. And we also talk about the legal element of privatization. That means that the investor could have the right to say, we want to have the international law, i.e. the English law, and this is all written in the law. And we are happy to accept that. So the state and the State Property Fund are happy to accept the English law for the contract and for the purchase of privatization, because we hope that that could enable further investors. So we're talking about two categories there, the large enterprise and the small enterprises. Perhaps you could talk about the preliminary results. What does it mean, the small privatization? As I've already said, that yes, small enterprises are those which are defined not just through the property, but also through their assets. The total value of them is 250 million hryvnias, and we sell them through the electronic auctions and electronic bids only. We have unfortunately lost time while we were passing the legislation. We had so many reforms which we decided to implement last year that the law on privatization only started working in summer this year. However, the list of those small enterprises is on our website and also the site of the Ministry of Economy. It's bilingual site. You can read this list and find that list there. It's in English and Ukrainian. We managed to prepare this list and now we have got 700 enterprises. There, the list is constantly renewed. And we are talking about, de facto, the development of small and medium-sized business in Ukraine. The faster we sell those state assets, the more profit and the more development we'll get, because at the moment, most of these enterprises are subsidized. They don't bring any profits at all.
150 successful auctions since the summer on small privatizations, leading to about $6 million into the state treasury. So but that's, as Mr. Trubarov said, it's not really the issue of how much money. It's the fact that these properties are being listed for sale and that there's a pickup on these properties and that they are in fact being done through the Prozoro, the world famous and famous award-winning Prozoro procurement system. And I think that we're selling off something like over 1,000 of these small state properties. I mean, we have a list price of 30 million, but again, the main thing is to get them into the hands of people. What about the large-scale privatization? What is on the block for this year? Not much left in this year, and you explained the reasons why it was a little slow in getting going, and it took us a while to hire all the advisors, etc. What is planned right now for large-scale privatization?
Well, just wanted to complete this information about the SMEs and small enterprises. I just wanted to say that those enterprises which are in the list, we hope that we'll get around 2 billion hryvnias for the budget. And of course, we require really good investors for that. But let's move now to the large-scale privatization. The Council of Ministers approves that list. At the moment, we've got 20 enterprises which are approved for this year. We are talking about such enterprises as Center Energo, which is our largest energy provider. And we hope that by the end of the year, we will not only sell it, but also will get the profit for the state budget. We also have got the enterprise which everybody knows about, which we can't sell, and that's Odessa Pre-Portove plant. And of course, we also have an advisor now who would help us do that. There is a number of other energy enterprises, such as the famous Oblenergos, and they will also be presented for sale. Then in Sumy, the chemical plant, Sumy Himprom, also a number of other enterprises, the coal company, then Azovmash, for example, also titanium plant, the hotel president. So it's quite what I was trying to show you, the different segments of economy are presented. Yeah.
Soviet era electro turbines, turbine manufacturers. These are really big enterprises, many of whom employ thousands and thousands of people.
Indeed, we have got a large number of employees, and that's not the main important point. They are key enterprises for their sector, be it the heavy industry or the energy. They're all interesting. And of course, we're absolutely sure that those plants could be very interesting for foreign investors. And we hope that the world community would see that, first of all, we've got the new law which provides transparency, openness, honesty of our privatizational process. And also, when we talk about the large-scale privatization, we are doing it with our partners, with our foreign advisors, who are selected in open competition. And the enterprises listed here already have those advisors selected. So we hope that quite soon we will ratify their positions, we'll approve their positions. But the key thing to understand is by the end of this year, we hope that the pool of advisors for all those enterprises will be finished and completed. But unfortunately, the privatization itself will run for next year. But for us, again, I would like to stress it again and again, the key thing is not just to buy or to sell an enterprise, is to show that the process is open, is transparent, that we will be giving individual attention to our investors. We'll look after you, we will make you feel loved, and we will show you the assets. And on behalf of the government, I would like to say that we guarantee that the biddings, the competitions will be the honest ones, it will be an open process. We won't write particular conditions for an individual enterprise, which will just say that only somebody who has two left shoes will be the buyer.
Talking, and you know, as Lazard's tsar for all things post-communist, you've had that look of been there, done that, bought the T-shirt. I've heard this before. How does this process, from your perspective, and you've been involved in examining this process, you see privatizations all over the Eastern Europe. What is different about this one, or is something different about this process as opposed to what you've seen before, and how does it sort of stack up with what's gone on in the region?
First of all, I'd like to say that what has happened this year and what Mr. Trubarov described is a very positive development for the issue of privatization in Ukraine, in the sense that there is now a clear law, that many of the remarks that have been formulated from the administration, because there are people who need to sign at the end of the day those documents, and we know what it means signing in any country, including in country of transition, but also from the investors. So that's positive, and definitely there should be a way more transparent process going forward. But you know, what's different, what's not different, and maybe a few ideas. And we have, I understand, very little time. Privatization is moving property rights, you know, and moving from capitalism to communism was taking the property rights and giving them to the state or the community.
That's the easy part.
And the toughest stuff is to go the other way, because you know, now you need to do it on behalf of everyone. Nevertheless, those are very concrete people who are supposed to do it. So, in my 8 years in government, I mean, the worst was when I was privatizing the tobacco industry, where all the cigarette smugglers were threatening you to kill you because, you know, they had all side deals with the tobacco companies.
That could be a serious disincentive.
Yes, but that's an extreme one. And second one is, for example, when we privatized the steel mill, with a lot of local tycoons and other people taking the money out and it being completely drowning in debt that came from banks being forced to give them loans just to pay the wage. And actually took me 12 years to finish all the legal proceedings against me. And I'm not alone. My colleagues from government who kind of took the responsibility to create a new and an old company, because nobody will invest in the existing steel mill, to take all the debts and deal with them. And therefore, somebody, and I was one of the 6 who voted to take on the state the debts in order to deal with them, and then have US Steel to take over the steel mill, and then 12 years of legal proceedings, a lot of people politically saying you gave it because, you know, US Steel paid exactly $3 for the steel mill. So we became the $3 people. And only after that steel mill became the biggest exporter of the country, only when people started to get their wages and their social contributions paid, and the railway company being paid, and the electricity company being paid, and when they, which was never done even at Tito, they fired up the second blast furnace to achieve the full capacity. Then people said, well, maybe, because in the meantime we lost the power, so the opposition came to power. Those who are calling us $3 people, they said this is a very good deal.
Yeah, maybe they overpaid.
The problem is that Mr. Trubarov and other people in the government need to do the tougher part. And so where I think could be a problem today, in where things are different, is that the objects that Mr. Trubarov, the large ones he has presented, this is not the first, you know, we are not on year 1 of changes in Ukraine. 28 years are behind us. Some people sign contracts. Some people are around. Some people have certain royalties. Certain people are owning lands around. It's not, quote unquote, a clean state-owned asset.
Yeah.
It is an asset which is encumbered. Typically, they're encumbered by things which are impossible just for a poor agency head to solve, or let alone a poor privatization advisor to solve, or let alone investors who, with all the money that exists around and all the companies claiming, countries claiming for investment, would just say, well, you get your act together, you know, you solve this for me, and then I'll come. Because frankly, I, investor, cannot solve the 28 years of problems.
But are you buying the company or you're buying the assets?
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's always better to sell the company. You're done, of course, from the point of view of the government and people involved. Right. And then, because the devil is in the details, of course, because say privatization. What are those representations and warranties that will be in the contract? What are the indemnities? What are the environmental representations and the liabilities that the state will assume? And who is going to decide on all of that? And I have to tell you, I mean, it is going to be a little bit pro domo, but Prozoro is good, but, you know, advisory services, and I know that people start laughing and saying, here's the greedy investment banker speaking. But frankly, not for investment banks, but for due diligence, environmental due diligence, legal tax, and so forth. So it happens, we know what it is. And I'm afraid that trying to have it as efficient or cheap as possible, as we see it, we decided not to pitch for privatization work after really wanting to do, because the way it was structured, we were worried that actually you could not do a full-blown international level type of work that was needed. So I would suggest, kindly, not for my bank, for others, because right now the M&A market is at the highest in history, which probably is something that we should all be worried about, because it means that probably we're at the height of a cycle. This being said, a lot of deals are being done. We in Europe, we're number 2, we do 40% on average of the deals done. So there is a lot of interest. There is interest, but it is important to look also with this positive trend that, for example, for OPZ, and sorry to speak about it because that's what you proposed, it's the 3rd time. The highest authorities of the country said it would be proposed cleaned of the old debt of a gentleman who is currently in Vienna. Nevertheless, what we see, what is offered, is the company as is. And then people tell you, yes, but don't worry, you propose a model and then we'll deal with it. But you see, the thing is that nobody, after everything that has happened, it would have been so much better to have a law on this so that the Rada takes a stance and then a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers to say this is how we go about it and we are going to deal with this debt. And then I think the interest, and as Mr. Trubarov said, the issue is not more the price for this asset, which has not been properly working for 3 years. They did not have enough gas, and actually in terms of environment, security, jobs, and Ukrainian agriculture, because this is a very important fertilizer producer. I thought that the better way would have been the one I just described. I wish you success. And then on Central Energo, I think it's definitely something that can be sold. Now the problem is that we all know that maybe not enough investment was made in that, and then I hear, although I didn't see the papers, that a minimum price that was set is $200 million.
212.
212? Let's see. Maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Trubarov, but again, because of what has happened, it is understandable that there should be a reserve price, because people don't want to have it on the cheap for somebody linked to do it. On the other hand, a price is what somebody in an open competition is ready to pay at a given point of time. And if you don't think it's the time to sell, don't sell. And I'll give you a third example, which is
very short one.
Very short. I think we have Turboatom, for example, on the list. Is it a minority stake? Is it a majority stake? We have heard different topics. Again, the fact that Ukraine will consider certain assets as strategic, it's completely fine. But then you say, we don't privatize, or we privatize a minority, but don't leave it untold. The only thing about turbines is that the world is moving, and if 5 years ago, the turbine business was looking great, look at the $23 billion that GE just took as impairment on the turbine business that they have. The same story goes with Antonov. Yes, it's a jewel, that's for sure, but let's look at what's happened outside of the duopoly, and maybe a triopoly, I don't know how you call it, once the Chinese get full-fledged into this market. So it happens, the two visible ones, the Canadian Bombardier came under Airbus, and Embraer, although it's not completely set and done, is coming under Boeing. So can really...
Maybe they'll fix the air conditioning on the Embraers, then I'll be really happy with that.
What I mean by that is that it's very important for very important assets to have a debate in Ukraine and to say it used to be and we were able to do it on our own. It's tougher, we still want to do it, so no privatization, this is the money we're going to give to them as good shareholders, or certain circumstances have changed and we want to open it up and to have the best possible partner. And I think that still remains to be done in Ukraine.
You did not disappoint on the extent of your analysis, and which is excellent. I think that the takeaway from that, and I'm going to come to Adomas at the end on Central Energo in particular, because I think we want to have a little bit of a drill down into one of the only main asset that's been put on the block and a big privatization, large-scale privatization. But I'd like to come to Philippe, who is probably sitting here going, why am I on this panel when I really am not going to be privatizing anything or buying anything out of privatization in Ukraine? Is that true?
The title of your panel is Good News and Privatization.
There we go. All right.
So I'll be the good news.
Good man, good man, good man, good news. I mean, you've got 21, you came into the market in 2015, you've got 21 million customers. The brand is absolutely solid. You've basically saved your partner's bacon from being run out of the country, and MTS, and they had some issues. Where, I mean, you're in 26 countries, right? I mean,
84.
84. What did I have? 26 something or other.
26
Anyway,
is
okay.
the equity ones.
The equity ones. So what would it take for you to take an equity stake in a Ukrainian telecoms, either in a privatization or in your existing relationship, etc.? This is your cue for good news.
I'm going to be incredibly disappointing to all of you, which is, A, I could obviously never answer to that sort of question on a panel, because if not, we would give all our recipes away. But B, more importantly, we've built over the last 20 years something quite unique, I think, which is the largest telecommunication company in the world. We serve about 1.1 billion people through different models. One is equity, so that's 26. Then the other one is partnerships, so that's about 50. And then the rest of it is what we call enterprise. So we have a closed list of top customers, and you name all the big companies you've mentioned in the West would be part of those, who frankly consume so much with us that they can pretty much ask whatever they want. Typical example is German car manufacturers, pick any. We work with them on the models that will come not in 4 years, but in 8 years to identify what they will need in terms of chipsets, in terms of communication. My car, for instance, has 3 SIM cards in it. One of them
This is the Lamborghini.
No, it's a Beamer, and one of the SIMs will basically identify 6 times per minute if my engine and all the like work well. The other one will provide connectivity to my kids, and the third one will do emergency services. You would have told me 10 years ago that we would have been so deep into the car business, probably I would have told you, oh, really, really? You tell me today, oh, drones are coming, and I reply immediately, oh yes, we know, because we have an airport now where everybody in the world can come and test their drones, so they can learn from it. So the answer to or the non-answer to your question is, one of the things we've learned into the journey is, if you get into a given model, and you see that direction of travel is positive, so if things are going as planned, there is no reason to change that model, because if you do, then you tend to affect the entire ecosystem. So what I'm saying here is that we were called in 2015 by a company, and I would say a country, both indicating to us that they wanted to anchor firmly Ukraine into Europe and make sure that by the arrival of big brands, the country in itself would be a normal European country. And that's exactly what we've done. 3G launch, full rebranding. Today we have 600 branded shops, 35,000 POS. All of that is exactly the same as if you were in any of our other markets. So well done is the first thing. We have, I think, 7,600 3G sites, already 3,000 4G sites. We'll get 90% coverage in 4G by 2020. So again, well done, and well done. Because of that, you don't really want to change the model. You don't want to tell your partner, oh, by the way, thanks for the ride. And that's, again, nothing to do with Ukraine. It has to do with value management as a global company. You don't want to go and tell your partner anywhere, hey, by the way, thanks for the ride. Now that it has worked well, I'd like to take over. It doesn't make sense. So the non-answer to your question is, frankly, we have a very good ride with our partner. We've achieved a lot, or they've achieved a lot with our help. More specifically, there are so many things that can be done, ranging from the smart cities to the finishing the entire integration into a real European market, launch of IoT, launch of agri-services, mobile money, and the like, and name it, and name it, and name it. No appetite to change the model. Why would there be?
Okay. Very interesting. So it's part of that process of a dynamic of change, of transformation in the country. Adomas, having heard that and taking into account some of the excellent points and reservations that Bozidar had, how is this going to impact on, for example, Centro Energo? clearly Bozidar, he didn't say it directly, but clearly he thinks the price is too high, and that it may not be realistic. We're basically have pressed the reset button, as Mr. Trubarov talked about earlier, on all the failed and really half-hearted privatizations that Ukraine undertook for various reasons. So now we're into a transparent process, we're into a serious process. What are the implications going to be this discussion on Centre Energo?
Well, Bozidar had a very passionate talk and many legit points. Many legit points. I would like to address all of them, but because we don't have much time, I will focus on price. Privatization from private transaction does not differ a lot, except that in privatization you have to have a process in place with, in which people, citizens of that country, will trust. Otherwise, privatization will fail. This is from what you started. And that means that you don't have complete entrepreneurship, complete flexibility. You have to have some controls. So either the process is very, very controlled, it's bad because you don't have flexibility, usually you fail. Or you have entrepreneurship, it's good in private business, in governments, especially when politicians are very creative, you end up with corruption. So this is why you have to find balance. And the current law on privatization states that before we privatize, we have to have independent, professional valuation of the asset. We have an auction, a tender on how this company is selected that will make evaluation. Then we hire that company, and the company makes evaluation. So they come up with this value. And it's not up to politicians to say, well, this is bad value, this is good value, this is built in the process. So many people have different opinions. By the way, just to put in perspective, Centre Energo is 7 gigawatts of power, coal and gas. 7 gigawatts versus 200 million, really it's very marginal price. I do understand that there are lots of problems with this asset and so on. By the way, it's not indebted, it's just other risks. So it seems to me that people that will buy these assets, either they will fail and will not make any money, or they will make $1 billion because the asset is so big. So it's very difficult to say what precise price is, especially with Excel model. And the best is to go to the market and check what the real price is. And what worse can happen with our process? We'll go to the market and we will find out that the price is too high because nobody came. But in a month or 1.5, you can repeat the process with lower price.
But doesn't that have political consequences? I mean, if you set a price at 212, it creates an expectation, and we all know what's happening in the parliament, in the presidential elections, etc. How much room do we have to actually go back and reset if we don't get the price that we want?
Well, this process that we have, where you have independent evaluation, it always will build expectations. And I think politicians will never be able to take risk to say, valuation is bad, let's change it. Let's change it subjectively. We think that it should be 50% lower or 15% lower. We go to the market. If the market says it's too high, then politicians could explain, look, nobody came. It means it's too high. We need to go down. I don't know by how much to go down, but we definitely need to go down. And in this way, you can explain. I don't see this as failure. I see this as plus in the process. Okay. Because once you have this figure, public valuation figure, then you cannot go down just by subjective decision. You have to prove that it's really too high. The only proof is going to the market. There is no other proof.
Clearly, you disagree.
Yes.
Yeah, but that you can.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Be in court for 12 years.
About who does this independent evaluation, and what are the methodologies, and there's also pressure on this independent evaluator. You're an independent evaluator, and it precisely say, look, big installed capacity, and you are sitting in your office in Kiev. You're going to say, no, it's 50. Of course, you're not going to say it's 50. Of course, I mean, those people have to live in Kiev and to get business before. They will get attacked saying, who are you working for, Mr. Independent Evaluator? Did this one pay you to give only 50? That's why it's normal that they would, according to the all available methodologies, they would be very prudent. And this idea of coming back to the market once you have activated, because if you want serious investors, they're going to do serious work. They're going to themselves hire serious advisors, and they'll give their best offer if you run, and as you are running, a transparent process.
Okay.
And the idea to have them repeat the entire thing, wait for 6 more months, to have other, they have moved on. That's the reality of the things. And that's why, I really hope that you said, because the issue is, what would you say the people and the politicians prefer? One is, as Mr. Trubarov said, he said the price is not the only measure. Maybe there's other things that are important to the Ukrainian people. Maybe you don't want somebody who's going to pay 300 million and then fire half of the people the day after. Maybe you would rather have somebody pay 150, but be bound by certain obligations in terms of investments, in terms of environment, and in terms of job. Maybe that actually could be sold better to the public over time, rather than kind of trying to maximize and then you do what you want. I mean, just a few ideas.
Very quickly, Adomas, and then I want to get Vitaly's perspective.
Regarding investment program and required investments and employment, that is included in the program. So this is taken care. What I wanted to say that, look, I do understand that we have difficulty because we have some advisors saying that the price is too high. What I'm saying that we have such a process, which is maybe not best. But what we need to do, we need to discuss the process, to discuss how to change it, but not say, that company, why it is not independent. The process says that they won the tender. And even if people don't like it, well, this is the way it is, because the process says it is. And we have to have some controls, because if we have complete flexibility, we will end up with other problems. This is why privatization is so much more difficult than private transactions.
Okay. Ви це почули. От, дуже цікава дебата, розмова. З вашого точки зору.
You have heard about it, and what is your point of view? Do we take UkraineInvest from privatization? From your permission, I will answer more widely to your question. When we review the issue of the large-scale privatization, we took as an example two types of organizations. One which is burdened by debts, like Odessa Port Factory, and another, Centrenergo, which we achieved the final stretch away. Obviously, the state of Ukraine, the State Property Fund of Ukraine, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, they are interested in a beautiful story of sale. But I believe that the mistake of the previous periods is that when we want to obtain a beautiful story, went outside the framework of legal conditions, why we could not sell Odessa Port Factory when we tried to do it, because we tried to do it very fast. Somebody expressed their interest. Okay, let's do it very, very fast, but it doesn't work in this way. We now employ assessors, and the bid was won by an American company. And one of the tasks of such a company was to find the mechanism of privatizations together with the state of Ukraine and other vehicles which will provide for beautiful sale of these assets. Let's set aside this Odessa Port Factory. We will have another opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, so we have to wrap up.
Переходя от старого законодательства к новому, получилось так, что мы вынуждены были подстраиваться.
We had to align ourselves to new legislation, and privatization of Centrenergo, it was a successful example of what we could get at the joint time between old and new legislation. If for all other enterprises the starting price was determined by an advisor who was selected for this process. But at that time, we also tried to implement it through the formal legislation. And the starting price looked like high, but our advisor told us that this price is good for the final say. And we, as the state, say, let's try to sell this asset at this price. And if we fail, but we believe that there are several investors who could come on these terms and will have no, not 10, 20 participants, bidders. These procedures could be quite short. We could have a couple of investors. But it will not be a disaster. We'll be able to carry out another tender on the basis of new legislation.
I've got to let Philippe, and if the special forces don't descend, I'll give you one more. So you've heard all of this. What does the future hold? What is, from your perspective, how does all of this, how do you package all of this as Vodafone and in terms of how Ukraine moves forward? And then we'll give Bozidar, because he's really pissed with me right now.
Like Lazard, one of the things we bring to the table is this capability of making comparisons, right? I mean, we provide services to clients in about 120 countries. So that gives you a good basis for comparison. One of the things that I repeat ever and ever again, in different countries, is less is more. People need to concentrate if they want to shine, and if they want to attract investors and if they want to attract projects, they need to shine. It's as simple as that. So bottom line is, my take from what I hear here, it's a very technical debate on very specific assets and all the like. What I would probably do is, well, in my sector, the transformation is a success. I would carry it through. Which is, I've heard, I think I spoke at this conference about 3 years ago about agriculture and all the like, and it still hasn't yet happened, which doesn't mean it's not ongoing. It means that people are positive to many, many things in Ukraine, and I think they need to get through. So practically, we've signed an MOU now to launch the first smart city in Ukraine. Well, we happen to operate, if I remember well, 16 or 20 smart cities around the world already, so we know a bit about them. One of the things we would do is bring it through. Don't let it at the MOU level. We've heard a lot of interest for IoT services, e-government and all the like. Well, but if I look at the country in all honest eyes, I don't see the public authorities being the main clients of these services. Well, we know from comparison that as soon as the public authorities start buying those services, then the rest of the population adopts them. So again, I would bring it through. Same thing, most of the European equivalent type of framework has been adopted in the telecom area, but not all of it. I mean, there are some very strange outliers like mobile number portability, which is a reality in every country in the OECD since maybe 20 years, is still not operational. Why? I don't really know. Probably because it's complicated, but everything is complicated in life. So yeah, less is more would be my take, which is some sectors, Ukraine is extremely successful. I mean, look at the way that your IET industry has capabilities, look at the way that new services come through, all that. I would bet on those, and I would make those very visible rather than spreading too thin into having myriads of debates about myriads of things. That's just my view from one industry.
You have 30 seconds, and then I will let Timofey Milovanov ask one question.
Just to say to Mr. Trubarov, who very precisely and openly explained the situation of Centenergo, precisely the potential purchasers, many of them, then rationally would say then my best course of action is to wait, because this price, maybe somebody gets it, but that's going to be big success. I wish you make it, or you wait and then you will have flexibility, and therefore you probably wait and to commit the resources to look at this file a bit later.
But wait for what?
Sorry?
How long? For what? Wait for what?
For the new process to go, where you don't have the constraints that you have today. So, and therefore, if you know that, then maybe you should reassess now. You see what I mean? And this is, and I would like to say, because I don't want to sound negative here, I believe that from this 100 billion whatever GDP, Ukraine, I deeply believe, is going to climb to 200, 300 billion. Remember that Poland, which was in pretty bad shape 25 years ago, is now standing at 560 billion euro of GDP with less population. Or we don't know, maybe now that Ukrainians moved to Poland.
Yeah, most of them are Ukrainians.
I know, you know, but so there's a lot of good investment will come. But now it's important to do it right.
One question. And Timofey, it's a question.
Yes, it will be a question.
A short question.
Yes, I understand. So let's negotiate what exactly I can ask. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm looking at this panel and fascinated how Ukrainians or the Ukrainian situation find ability to make the same mistakes in different areas. And I want to you, the panel, answer why this is happening. This is going to be my question. This is my statement for your question. We have seen exactly the same problem in the resolution of assets of insolvent banks. There were assessments. Everyone was afraid to give a fair price assessment. Why? Because there would be security services coming back and accusing people of corruption. The highest rank official of the country was saying, no, we're going to look for the market price slowly so that no one can accuse us that we actually sold things a little bit too cheap, often to the insiders, because this could be the guys who are actually the most efficient in handling these assets after they buy them back. So there is expediency, and we've seen that, in fact, from Philippe too, saying that things have to be done. Why people are not doing this? Because they are afraid of this punitive argument of the corruption. So how are you going to resolve that? This is my question to them. Basically, it's stolen. Ukraine is stolen. While it needs to divest the assets into efficient hands, they are sitting in state-owned hands while insiders are stripping the assets from the enterprises anyway. So what of this, waiting and seeing and exceeding the price? Set the reserve price at zero. Sell it to people who, ensure there is competition in the market. Attract investors, protect the property rights, get the market price in one auction. Why are we waiting?
Got it.
Explain to me why we are waiting.
You're very clear. Vitaliy.
My point of view is as follows. The state should perform its main function to regulate the process. If we speak about the privatization, about the state property, and it was our starting point, the state should have the only function which will secure its security, infrastructure, nuclear, everything else should be privatized with the attraction of investment to our country. Now we say how we do it. And I will repeat myself. We divided the whole state property into two parts. Small-scale privatization and then a large-scale privatization. We start it in two processes. Either we increase the price or decrease the price. But in the end, we have to pay the actual real price. And when we speak about the large-scale privatization, who determines the price? The seller selects an advisor who assesses the asset, and he says that this asset, the price is 100 million. We start selling as 100 million. If we fail, then the law allows us to start the process. For the first time, I'm in London, and I had a ride in the underground. It's a very nice transportation system, but in order to get from one part of the city to another part of the city, I have to change at certain station. But in order to select another track, we sometimes have to come back and to set a new train. But let us finish, complete this way and come to the methods which are used used globally, and then we can sell our assets at a fair price. But nobody will understand us if we sell our assets at a zero price.
Thing which explains 5% of the result. I mean, price. You have auction top down or bottom up. it is not crucial thing. What matters is move fast, as you say. And this is the fastest route right now. Because what we can do, we can put the assets very soon. And if not, we can go to the market in 1.5 months. So this is best. I don't understand why we criticize each other over this such a small issue. Because what matters is to have successful privatization.
Philippe, you have the last word.
Well, the last word is twofold. First, having an Italian family, I'm always fascinated by the capacity of Ukrainians to have passionate debates because they somehow beat us into this capability. More seriously, I think there is obviously, from a comparison perspective, there is obviously truth in both positions here, which is on the one hand, you want to follow a process that is thorough in everything, because it's the only way to identify what you do good. You know, one of the things that I'm always surprised in many countries is the capability of people identifying what is going wrong. Again, I would take it differently. I came on the panel because of the good news part, which is you've done a lot over the last 5 years, a lot. And you should be proud of it. It's as simple as that. Based on that, there are plenty of learnings of things you have done well, and therefore, you know, I would bet on those. I mean, at the end of the day, your procurement processes, the capability of people to have discussions, so yes, things have to be done. They also have to be done in a structured way. And I completely agree on the idea that price is only one of the elements. I mean, at the end of the day, of any asset, what matters is that it works. At the end of the day, it makes the country shine once it's operational again under new leadership or under new ownership. Well, in Italian, we have a sentence which says, chi va piano va sano, which means if you go slowly, maybe a bit too slowly sometimes, you still stay healthy. I wish you all to stay very healthy and develop your market, or continue to develop your market.
Ladies and gentlemen, I see the Minister of Infrastructure has joined us, so we're going to have to wrap this up. That was a signal I was waiting for, Volodya. I'd like you to join me in thanking our audience. You know, I'm glad we had a healthy debate about this, and thank you, Timofey, for your intervention, because Poland came back to this. It was discussed a number of times, and really, you know what? This, without over-exaggerating, Ukraine is where Poland was in 1994, and I think the main takeaway is that we have now credible processes in place. It's the process that is as important as the final result. Whether we sell Centro Energo for $212 million or we sell it for $1, really, to me, doesn't matter. The point is that everybody will say, well, that was done transparently, that was done in a proper process. You fight corruption by shining a light in dark corners. And Ukraine has done an awful lot, as the gentleman and the other panels have said, in terms of bringing in the processes and the procedures and the corporate governance, both in state-owned enterprises, well inside the government, to actually start building a country based on European institutions. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and enjoy Volodya's brilliant speech.